what's up guys? Finally, this is the video that you guys have been requesting. This is going to be the install video covering the R56 Mini Cooper platform. This covers the Minis from 2007 to 2013. Over the last 2 years, there's been a lot of questions asked, specifically K-swap in this chassis. So I hope that this is going to answer a lot of the questions that I receive on a daily basis, and hopefully you'll learn and take something from this video. Even if you've already done this swap, I would still encourage you to watch it, because I'm going to be covering a lot more stuff that I've recently figured out or recently offered to make the swap easier. So I'm just going to compile everything into one video and try to put as much information all into this one video. But everything I pretty much have here laid out on the table is basically what I offer to help you make this install process a lot easier. I either have it laid out here on the table, or some of the parts are already installed on the swap that I have. Now, a lot of the questions that I've been getting asked, I'm going to be covering a lot of it in this video. And the biggest question that I get the most is, what engine and what transmission can I use? Now, I've already listed specific in details the types of transmissions and engines that my kit will work on. When you go on my website, rptcreations.com, you go hit the tab that says engine performance, scroll down and go into the R56 swap kit. Scroll down into the description, and I basically list all the transmission and engines you can use. There's a lot of variables to the K series. It really all depends on your goals, and it really depends on your budget as well. There's 5-speed transmissions, 6-speed transmissions, there's the K20 motor, K24 motor, and in both of those motors there's a whole bunch of different ones. You have the K20A2, K20A3, you have the K20 Z1, you have the K24A1, K24A4, the list goes on and on. So again, do your own research. The K series is one of the biggest, most popular swaps in the 4-cylinder world. So I guarantee you, any question that you have in specific to the engine or transmissions, it's been covered. So just do a quick Google search, and I'm sure you're going to find the answer to your questions. I don't want to go too specific into the details and all that, because this video is just going to become way too long, and I kind of just want to get straight to the point and cover the install process to make it a lot easier for you guys. But here specifically is my 2011 Mini Cooper S. Like I said, I went with a JDM K24 engine with a 5-speed manual transmission. I'm going to show you basically the swap kit, what I offer, and basically I'm going to show a few parts that I personally use just to make the swap a lot easier. All right, so we're gonna start over here. Basically what's included with the R56 swap kit will be your engine mounts and brackets, the K-series tucked engine harness, as well as the conversion harness. The engine harness, each connector is labeled. That way it makes it a lot easier for you to figure out where everything plugs up. One thing I will say is I've always offered this kit, and you had to use either an RSX or a Civic Si transmission with this kit. I've gotten a lot of requests on people wanting to use the Acura TSX or Honda Accord transmission. And the reason is because they're easier to source, and they're a bit more affordable than the Civic Si or the RSX transmission, as they're getting harder to find. So if you've already purchased this kit and you want to switch the transmission, I will sell the transmission mount separately for those that want to use the Accord or TSX transmission. So if you've already purchased this kit, I will offer separate. Moving forward, for new customers, when you go to place your order, there will be a drop-down menu on my website where you will select what transmission you have, and that'll determine which swap kit you get. The only thing that'll change is literally just the transmission mount itself. So either this one, whether you have an RSX, or the other one that's the Accord TSX, it'll be just the transmission mount, and it'll go into the same exact transmission bracket. So none of the other parts to the kit will change other than the mount, like I mentioned. If you do go with the TSX transmission, there is some things that I want to mention. It uses a magnesium casing, which is a lot lighter. However, I have seen a lot of people have issues with them where they crack. Now, again, it's hit or miss. They don't all crack, but there has been a lot of cases where they do. So that is the one downside to them. The second thing is, with this kit, if you're using an RSX or a Civic Si transmission, it is a direct bolt-on. There is no modifications needed. If you do go with the Accord or TSX transmission, the housing, the bell housing, is a little bit bigger than the RSX. So here on your subframe, right around in this corner, and you'll see when you mock it up, but in this corner here, you will have to cut this lip here. You'll have to cut into it some just to give it that extra clearance. So those are the two downsides to the TSX and Accord transmission. And I just, want to mention it here before, you go ahead and just pull the trigger on buying one of those transmissions. However, the option is there. Moving forward, this is a new product that I offer. This is the manual intermediate shaft that is needed for the swap for the axles. The way you see it is exactly how it'll come out of the box once it arrives to you. These I have seen used anywhere from $150 to about almost $250. And again, they're used, worn out. These I sell now for $189 on my website. It includes, again, the intermediate shaft, the collar ring, the seal, the carrier bearing, and the housing. It'll come ready for you to just slide right in, bolt it onto your block, and off it goes. This here is, one part fits all. So if you have a K20 engine or a K24 engine, it doesn't matter. It'll still bolt up. If you have an Accord transmission, TSX, RSX, Civic Si, again, one part, it fits all. Doesn't matter what application you have, it'll work on everything. Another part that I have available is the fuel kit. So I have my own fuel rails with the liquid filled gauge, comes with all the fittings, as well as the plug and play fuel line. Again, this will also come in your package, ready to go. You do not need to assemble anything. I do it all for you. This here, basically, your 180 degree fitting will plug right into the factory fuel line coming off the firewall. This literally will slip into here. It'll lock in. The fuel line will come up and around, and the other end will plug right into this fitting. So that is your complete fuel kit. Another product that I have is a plug and play steel braided clutch line. Now it includes everything you see here is the clutch line and both end fittings for your swap. Now I have two options of these. If you have a factory manual R56 chassis that has the factory quick disconnect fitting here on the firewall, you'll have to select that you have a manual chassis and you'll get the shorter line. For those that have an automatic chassis and don't have that line, I have another option where it's a longer line. The fitting will go inside of your chassis and connect directly onto the master cylinder that's on the pedal. So basically it's the same exact line as this, it's just longer so it reaches inside of the car. But like I said, it's plug and play. This fitting here will slip right into here and lock in, and then the other side is just going to go directly onto your slave cylinder, or like in this case, my hydraulic throwout bearing. Now, this brings me to another thing. I highly recommend, it's a little bit more expensive, but I highly recommend the Clutch Master hydraulic throwout bearing. I get no incentive, so it's not one of those, paid promotion parts. This is just something from my personal experience that I've been doing for a couple of years now, and I will never go back to your traditional K-Series slave cylinder. For some reason on the K-Series, if you run the K-Series slave cylinder, on the Mini, the clutch pedal is just super stiff. I have been using the Clutch Master hydraulic throwout bearing, and it lightens up the pedal. It's night and day of a difference. It makes the clutch pedal a lot softer, and overall it just performs and works much better with this platform. So again, it's a Clutch Master hydraulic throwout bearing. I will leave the part number in the description. Just click the drop down, and I will list the part number on there specifically for this hydraulic throwout bearing. Moving on, the throttle pedal and cable. So the Mini uses a factory drive-by-wire, throttle assembly. And basically all that means it's computerized. There's no manual, cable or nothing. I have a video, if you check out my other YouTube videos, I have a video specifically on how to convert your Mini Cooper pedal into a manual cable. That way you can use a manual operated throttle body. So be sure to check out that video. I won't be covering this in this one. However, I already have my pedal all modified. This is what I'm going to be used. Here is the part that I speak on that other video. This is the factory Mini part number. So just take a screenshot or jot this down. This is the bracket that you're going to need to make this pedal secure. So this is an R53 pedal. You cannot use the R56 pedal and convert it. I get these on eBay for about $30 shipped. And then some of them may or may not come with this bracket. If not, this is the one that you'll need. What this will do is you'll be able to lay this down on your floor, and you're basically going to bolt this down. You'll have to get creative and use your own, like either some self-tappers or find a way to bolt this down. And what that'll do is it allows this pedal, as you can see here, it allows the pedal to slide in here and lock in place on the floor. That way it can't go anywhere. So that covers the throttle. And then I don't obviously sell these. You'll have to source them. However, people ask me, what do you run for an ECU? This is just like a factory RSX computer that has the K-Pro installed. K-Pro is basically a chip that they solder onto the factory computer, and it allows you to basically program and tune your car and do all your calibrations, so on and so forth. So again, this is an RSX computer that has had the Honda K-Pro chip installed. You can get these online, either Part Out Guys, eBay, Facebook groups. But this is the computer that's going to be plug and play to my harness. It has to be an 02 to 04 Acura RSX computer. There's a few other computers. If you do a research on Honda K-Pro, they list all the the ECU codes that you can use. This one is a PRB, which is an Acura RSX Type S computer, 6-speed. But they'll tell you all the computers that are compatible with the K-Pro. There's other computers you can use like AEM V2, AEM Infinity, Fuel Tech. I mean, the list goes on and on. But me personally, this is the computer that I recommend. It is a little expensive. However, they have multiple versions. You can still find some floating around like a V2 which is a version 2 and a version 3. Those you can get them for, you know, a couple $100. The V4, which is the only difference is that it's Bluetooth compatible, so you can hook up your phone to it and just monitor all the live data. The V4s go anywhere from like $850 to $1,200. So they are a little on the pricey side. However, again, this is my preferred. If you have just a regular street car, daily driver, or just like, you know, a setup that's not too crazy, this is my go-to computer that I like using, and it's what I'm going to be running on my R56. So this pretty much covers, you know, my swap kit, some parts that I offer, and other parts that you are going to need as well. Now, some other things to go over, I'm going to start with the post bracket. Now, if you are going to run a K24, you can get these brackets on Amazon or eBay. They're like $30 brand new now, $30, $40 shipped to your door. This is out of an 2002 to 2006 Honda CRV. You need to use the Honda CRV post bracket if you're going to be running a K24. If you're going to be running a K20 engine, you will need the post bracket out of the RSX Type S, 02 to 04. So again, specifically for the post bracket, depending on the engine you're going to use, you have to get the bracket that I mentioned. Moving on, the K-Series will come, a lot of them will come with a power steering pump. You will have to eliminate it, obviously, because in the R56, it used an electric steering, which will operate once we're done with this video. So they make, I mean, you can get an expensive one from like K-Tuned or forgot what other brands have them, but they make a power steering delete kit. Which is basically just this bracket with a pulley to run it. So I get away with the Amazon ones. They're cheap, they're a knockoff, but I have yet to have an issue with them. Some people have had an issue where this bearing locks up and seizes and it burns the belt out. I personally have been running these for years now. I've never had one fail on me, knock on wood, but again, depends if you want to cheap out or not. That's totally on you, but you will need one of these delete kits. Another thing to make the swap a lot easier that I recommend, I also get this off of like Amazon. It's pretty cheap. Again, you can go with a K-tuned one if you want to spend the extra money if you have it. But it's a thermostat swivel neck. This makes the install a lot easier, and it makes it a lot more flexible on the radiator hose that you're going to use. It basically speaks for itself. It's just a billet swivel neck, so it allows you to point the hose in whatever direction that you want to make it a lot easier depending on your application. It does come with these two plugs. The only issue that I've ever seen is just make sure not only you put Teflon tape, but also use some gasket maker, because these do tend to seep out a little bit of coolant if they're not sealed perfectly. Here, this one will be open. When you order it, they do not include a plug for here. This is an oxygen sensor plug. So it's an M18, I believe, by 1.5. But it's just a standard O2 sensor, plug. And it threads in there perfectly. Again, put some Teflon and silicone and just block that off. None of these ports here are needed if just using a standard engine. If you do get crazier into like a standalone system, or you want to run aftermarket temperature gauge or something, then you have those ports that you can tap into. Other than that, I mean, those are the few little things that will make your swap a lot easier. The rest is pretty much straightforward. You use all the factory sensors like your idle air control valve, your TPS, map sensor, coolant temperature sensor, cam sensors, coils. Everything that comes on the factory motor will plug into my harness. The only thing is, if you do use a K24 like I have here, the knock sensor connector will be different. So you'll have to swap it out for a RSX, like a 2002 RSX knock center, RSX Type S. That'll plug directly onto the harness. The knock sensor is really not needed, especially if you run the K-Pro. You can just disable the knock sensor. You don't really need to run it, but if you do want to utilize the knock sensor, again, O2 RSX Type S, it'll plug right in. The other sensor, if you're using a K24 like me, the connector on my harness will not clip into here. You will have to swap out the K24 crank sensor for a K20 RSX sensor. So again, 2002 Acura RSX Type S crank sensor, it'll bolt right up to here, no modifications, and it'll plug directly to my harness. If you don't want to buy a sensor, I mean, they're cheap. You can get them as cheap as like $20. If you get the K24 connector, you can just swap it out on my harness. However, the pin out is different, so you will have to look that up and swap the pins. It's cheaper and easier, in my opinion, to just swap the sensor and call it a day. If you already have a K20, then you don't even need to worry about that sensor. Other than that, everything else will plug right in. Check this out, guys. This is something that I just tried, and I take back what I said about the crank sensor. This is something new that you guys can do to save a little bit of money. If you have a K24 engine with a K24 crank sensor like I have, you don't need to swap it out with a K20 sensor anymore. So you'll see, I already did it on mine, so I can't show you, but if you look at your crank sensor, you're gonna have two tabs on the side of this plastic connector piece. I went on my table grinder and I just shaved them both off, and that allows the K20 plug to slide in and still lock in place. Now, if you go that route with my harness, you'll want to de-pin and swap out the wiring, because the K24 uses a different pin out than the K20. So if you have my harness and you have a K24 crank sensor you'll want to use, this is the correct pin out that you'll want to go with. You'll want to switch it and put power on pin 1. Yellow will be your signal and the black will be your ground. So this is the correct pin out to go with it. And in order to do so, you'll just take a pick and you remove this locking connector or a locking clip. And then in here, may be hard to see. Let me try to zoom in. There you go. Inside of there, on the very bottom in here, you'll see these little locking tabs. You'll want to grab your pick and pull them down while you simultaneously pull out the wire. So that'll allow you to de-pin this instead of having to cut this and solder it and all that. So again, this will be the correct pin out. Once you're finished, reinstall this locking clip and you can now connect and use your K24 crank sensor with the swap. That pretty much covers the sensors and some of the stuff that makes the swap a lot easier. So from here, we're going to be moving on now into the install process. All right, moving on to the install. First thing I like to do is bolt on the transmission bracket onto the chassis. It's pretty self-explanatory. You're gonna use your factory bolts, like I mentioned. I like to put everything, I like to thread it all hand tight. Once all the 3 bolts are threaded hand tight, then you can go ahead and bolt them all the way down. The next step is gonna be to install the motor mount bracket onto the chassis. One thing I do wanna make a note of, Some cars have been worse than others, but you will have some seam sealer on here. Some cases on some cars, they're applied so heavy from the factory, you may have to scrape off some of the sealer just so this bracket sits on better. This one is not so bad, so I'm literally just going to line it up and just run the bolts right through. All right, I've got the bracket bolted down. I like to get this in place. It just makes it a lot easier. I'll put the mount in, line up the bolt, and I'll just leave a couple threads on there, and I'll flip this back. That way, once I get the engine in, it's just a matter of flipping this over, lining up the bolts. It's already handy. The next step will be installing the transmission mount. So grab your transmission mount, line it up, line all the bolts up. Now, once you get all the bolts lined up, you'll want to go ahead and tighten the bracket, or the mount, I should say, all the way, because the next step will be putting this in the car, and the frame rail rides along here, and it actually covers half of this bolt. That bolt actually just tucks right under the frame rail, so tighten those all up, because once it's installed, you won't really be able to access that bolt there. So I'm gonna go ahead and tighten this all up, and then the next step, I'm gonna show you the easiest and the best way, in my opinion, to install the swap. All right, now that we have everything bolted up, it's time to install it. One thing I will say is, if you can invest your money in one of these cradles, it makes this install process so much easier. It's unbelievable. You can get these, I don't even remember where I bought this. This was a couple years now. I think it was either on eBay or the company PLM. They are specific to either the K20 or K24, and also be careful when ordering them, because some will only bolt up and work without the transmission. It's just to dolly the engine around. You'll want the one that will clear and bolt to allow you to put the whole swap together. Again, it'll make it a lot easier on you. But anyway, moving on, the best way that I found to install this is start with the transmission going in first. I'll actually have to lower the car down right now, but point the transmission in first and then walk the engine in, if that makes sense. So I will start, I will bring this in like so. I will move it in. The transmission will go right above that subframe, and then you can swing the engine in and line everything up together. As you can see, that was fairly simple. One thing I do want to mention now, once you get this in, you'll want to go ahead and obviously line up the transmission and the engine mount. I do want to say this one, once you get this lined up, you can fully torque these down and lock them into, the mount onto the bracket. However, this bolt here, you'll want to leave loose. And the same thing here, you'll want to leave that transmission bolt loose. There's two reasons. One, if you tighten those two down, once you go to put in the rear bracket and the motor mount, it'll make it more difficult, and it'll make it very tight to line everything up. The second reason is, if you tighten these two up and then try to do the other one, you may experience some additional unnecessary vibration, and it's due to an installation error. The proper way to do it is to line all three mounts up and then go ahead in a sequence and tighten and torque down the bolts down. And that is the best way to install it, to have a smooth install and to have a smoother non-vibrating car. I mean, I've seen them as bad as, having rattles into the dashboard. So again, just take your time, leave these two bolts loose until you get that rear mount. Once everything is lined up, then go ahead and torque everything down. All right, swap is in. I have it holding on just by the two bolts. It's all hand tight. This one, I fully bolted it down. as I mentioned. So the engine is basically holding in place, and now we're going to be installing the oil pan bracket. These are also on my website. This is obviously mandatory and needed for the swap to allow the rear engine mount to bolt up to it. So let's go ahead and install that. The oil pan bracket's installed. The bolts are torqued down. Now the last thing needed to install is going to be the dog bone mount itself. If you look closely, you'll see how there's a slight angle and pitch from the bracket to the subframe. Once you grab your dog bone mount, just look for the same angle in it. It'll only line up correctly one way. So it might take you a few tries. You might have to flip it around, but again, it'll only sit correctly in one position only. So if you feel like there is a gap on one side more than the other when installing it, or if it just seems like you're fighting it to install, it's incorrect. Keep flipping it and it'll literally slide in correctly one way. So look how nice and smooth it goes in and lines up. All right, so again, it'll only line up correctly in one position when installing it, so you'll know when it's installed properly. Once you put it in, then like I said, you can go ahead and go up to the top. I personally start with the engine mount first. I torque that all the way down. Then I torque the transmission mount up top all the way down. And then this will be the final one that I lock in place. All right, now for the fun part. If you are not going to be running the alternator in the stock location, like if you're going to be running one of those alternator relocation kits that moves it down to the bottom, like down in this area, then skip this step. You don't need to worry about it. However, if you're going to be running the alternator in its factory location like I am, you will see how there's barely any clearance. The frame rail, every other pulley clears. So unlike the R53, where the water pump pulley hits the frame rail, on this chassis, it does not. So you don't need to go ahead and beat the entire frame rail like you do on the earlier generation. On this one, everything clears and there's plenty of clearance, with the exception of the alternator. The R56, for some reason, has that little hump that you see there, like that little ball spot. So you'll have to go ahead, remove the alternator, and I mean, you can mark it if you need to, but it's pretty self-explanatory. So let me go ahead and remove this so we can get out of the way. And let's take a better look. Try and do this with one hand. So once you remove it, you'll see what I'm talking about. So right here, this area here is where the alternator hits. So the best way about it, I mean, the easiest and the quickest is I'll bolt the reinforcement bar, the factory reinforcement bar that goes across. I'll, thread 2 nuts on there. I'll put it in place. That way you have the support on both sides. I'll grab a hammer and I'll just beat this in about 1/2 an inch, maybe an inch, depending, just to gain that clearance for the alternator pulley. Other than that, that is the only, quote unquote modification that you need on this chassis for it to clear. So let me go ahead and bolt this in. I'm gonna hammer that in and we'll be finished. All right, have the alternator back in. As you can see, now there's clearance. You don't have to hit it too much. Again, it's just enough to free up the pulley and give enough room so you can get a belt on and off for future maintenance. If you leave it too tight, then you might not be able to slip the belt off and you'll have to unbolt the alternator. So you don't have to go too crazy. Again, just massage it enough for it to clear. and you're good to go. That's the only modification to the chassis that you'll have to do. All right, so for the fuel line, very simple. The one with the U-bend, it's literally just gonna come in here. It's gonna slip in and push it in until you hear lock. You're gonna hear it click right there. So once it's locked, you can pull on it, it's not gonna come out. So the fuel line goes in there. This here can be either left the way it is, or you can cut it off, remove the line. This is for the evaporator system, which is no longer gonna be needed. So you can either, again, leave it, or like I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go ahead and remove it. Once you're done, the other end, again, it's gonna come up. It's gonna pass through. And then I'm personally missing it right now. However, the same quick disconnect fitting that's down there will be supplied, and it'll already be on the line. The other end will come and slip on and click directly into here and lock in place, and then that's it. Your fuel supply line is all hooked up, and you can move on. Next thing will be the clutch line. These will come loose. You'll have to tighten them down yourself. However, this end here with the O-ring is going to go, again, if you got a manual chassis like me, it's literally just gonna come up under here. Basically, you're gonna put it in here and push it in until you hear that clip. And you could pull on it, it's locked. Once that's in place, then you'll bring it. You can route it however you want. I like to go behind the bracket here just to keep it clean. And then the other end is gonna have this fitting where it's going to screw. In this case, if you use the clutch master throttle bearing like I recommend, it's you're gonna thread this fitting on here, and then you're gonna lock this down in place. And that's it. The clutch will be all hooked up. You'll just have to, bleed it, and that's it. You'll have a fully functional clutch with a plug and play kit. Clutch line is installed. So I have it plugged into there. I have it coming down and around by the bracket, and then it comes, and I have it secured onto the hydraulic throttle bearing. One thing I did forget to mention that's actually very important, when you go ahead and install the hydraulic throttle bearing, it's pretty self-explanatory. You can only go in one way. However, these lines, this is what you have to pay close attention to. The bleeder valve or the bleeder line has to be at the top. If you cross these and put it at the bottom, you'll never get the air out, and you'll never have a working clutch. So make sure that the bleeder is on the top of the hydraulic throttle bearing, and then the supply line is on the bottom. That covers the clutch. The next thing I wanted to move on to and cover is the heater hose lines. So these are the factory lines from the Mini Cooper for the heater core. You can do one of two things because there's many variants. You can either cut these to length, and it should work on your application. But if not, you'll have to get a cutoff wheel and cut these factory clamps and remove these original hoses. And then you could just go to a local auto parts store with one of these and just get the right diameter hose, get a couple feet of it, and then just, run your own lines onto here. So I'll show you. So you'll have these two heater pipes. Depending on the variant motor, they might be angled differently. However, you'll still be left with two heater hose pipes on your K-Series, and they're going to attach into there. I'm going to start installing the engine harness. This will be the first thing that I do, and then we'll move on to the conversion harness. As I mentioned, the conversion harness, each connector is labeled and letting you know exactly where it goes. These that are marked 1, 2, 3, 4, this will be, injector 4, injector 3, injector 2, so on and so forth. Same thing for the coil connector. It'll just have a number. That is just telling you exactly where it belongs. So this one will be 3, so this is coil cylinder number 3. Everything else, again, is all labeled. So I'm gonna go ahead and start plugging everything in. All right, the wiring harness is installed. I do want to make note of something. I've had customers in the past reaching out for me to help diagnose their no start condition, and it's always because of this ground wire here. So this ground wire on my wiring harness needs to be secured on this stud here. A lot of people, I've noticed, will secure it onto here or here. There is no ground continuity here, and it's because of the rubber gasket around the valve cover. So make sure that this ground is secured here on this stud. Now, to go with that, you need to provide ground to the engine itself from the chassis. This is the factory ground strap on the R56 that I retain still, and I'll actually bolt it to the 10mm bolt right here on the timing cover. So remove that, and you can bolt this right in there, and you now have ground to your engine. Now, if you've watched my previous video on the first gen Mini Cooper, I always run the wiring harness through the firewall and tuck it up behind the driver's side dash. The R56 does have this indent here that I used to run like a 2-inch hole saw, make an opening there, and then I run it through the actual firewall itself behind the wiper motor. That works. This is all going to come down to whatever you prefer and where you want to mount the computer. I'm actually going to try something different. I made a hole, an 1 3/4 inch hole here. Don't make the mistake that I made. You actually get a better run through with the harness from the valve cover through here. But I took an 1 3/4 inch hole saw, made an opening there. I ran the wiring harness. It'll go around the battery box, and then I fed it through the factory grommet here. From the factory, it'll have this cover. I just popped it off. It'll have this little nipple coming out on here. I grabbed it like so. I pulled it. I took a razor blade and just cut it. And then I ran the engine harness through there. And then you can still put back the factory cover like so. All right, and it's neat and out of the way. And then it actually runs down into here. All right, you can see the connectors. You can pull them. The wiring harness is long enough to reach down. I'm going to mount the ECU right up in here, and I will also mount the conversion harness up in there also. I've seen one customer who's actually mounted it behind the secret compartment. So if you want to go through the work removing the interior plastics, you can do the same thing and actually mount your relays behind this cover, and then just run the wiring down. But I'm just going to tuck everything up in there and go from there. Now, to provide power to your charging system and the starter. This is the factory cable that comes from the battery, and originally it would go to your starter, and then you'd have this connection to your alternator. You could do this a few different ways. The way I'm going to go about it is I'm actually going to cut this terminal right off and cap it, and then all it's going to do is just provide power to this cable. And this is actually long enough to come down and around and use the actual factory terminal, and it actually goes right onto the K-Series starter. So I'm going to run it this way, and then from here I'm just going to make my own jumper to go from this post over to the alternator for the charging system. So That's one way to do it. Another way that I've done it is I've actually taken this cable and moved it alongside of the firewall, and I've gotten like a power distribution block. You can get them on like Amazon, pretty cheap. I actually secured it onto here, and it's got like a post, like a stud coming out, where this will slip onto, and then I would run my own wire from there down and around to the starter, and then the same thing, a jumper. I feel like this is the easiest way, since you're already making use of what's already on here, with, you know, least amount of modifications. So I'm gonna just cut this off, cap that, secure it out of the way, and then use the factory cable to come down onto the starter. And then I'm just gonna make my own jumper coming around. But again, there's multiple ways. There might even be a better way that you can think of to go about this. But the point is, you just want to run a constant power cable from the battery to the starter and to the alternator. And then, you know, now moving on, I'm going to go and install the conversion harness. The fun part, we're going to be working on the wiring. So what you see here is the conversion harness that's included with all of my kits. If you've watched the video for the R53, this is the same exact conversion harness that I use in that video. I'm just going to be explaining specifically what's going to be needed and which wire is needed for the R56 specifically. So just to give you a little overview, these are your relays. You have one for your main relay, another one for the fuel pump, and another one for the oxygen sensor if you choose to run one. And I'll go into details in a little bit with that. You have your C101 connector, which the engine harness will have the same connector, but just a male end, and it'll plug directly onto here. It comes pre-wired with OBD2 port for diagnostic purposes. This is your connector for oxygen sensor. So what I mean by that is, this is optional. You don't have to run one. The convenience of having this connector here is you can run like in a 2002 RSX Type S front or primary oxygen sensor, and if you enable that, this will give the K-Pro a wideband reading, so you can use it for tuning purposes and whatnot. But again, it's not mandatory. You can disable it. You don't have to run one if you choose not to. And then you have your E connector. Your E connector will plug into, if you're using, again, the Honda K-Pro. If you're looking at it here, this will be connector A, B, and E. One thing that I do want to cover, because I've had a good amount of people message me and say that there's no power to their ECU. Almost every single time, it's because they have the connector switched. So this connector will actually clip into connector A or E. It'll work on both, as they're the same. You have to be careful. Make sure that connector E goes here on the ECU, and then the two connectors from the engine harness will plug into here, connector A and B. So don't cross these two, because you know, your computer will not power up and nothing will work. So moving on to the wires now. There's a lot more wires than is needed. This is universal. I use this on multiple applications, not just on the Mini Coopers. So there's a lot of additional wires that don't necessarily have to get hooked up. The ones we're going to be focused on are the following. Your red and green and blue is going to be used. The red is going to go to a constant 12 volts, which I'll show you in a little bit. Your green is going to be switched ignition, so meaning it'll only give it power when the key is on. And then this will be your fuel pump 12 volt output, which we will be tapping into the factory wire that goes to the fuel pump in the back. Then here in this bundle, the wires that you're going to need here is the pink, which is your fan output control. So that one wire will trigger your factory Mini Cooper fan to turn on and off via the you know, Honda ECU. The other wire you'll want is the thick black wire, which is going to be your starter trigger, coming directly from your push to start. And yes, your push to start will function like factory. I'll show you where to run that after. And then in here you have a purple and white wire. The purple wire is coming off of the engine harness, which will trigger low oil pressure light. So if you want to wire up like a separate light for that, you can. And then the white wire, and again, everything is labeled. If you have any doubts, it's all labeled, but the white wire is for VSS output. We don't need to hook that up because your factory speedometer will still work. The Mini uses the rear ABS sensor to pick up speed signal. So as long as your ABS sensors are working properly, your speedometer will still work, and the ECU will get its vehicle speed through the engine harness of the Honda. So you do not need to hook up the white wire. That's something for other applications. And then the last bit of wires are going to be a black and a yellow. So the yellow wire, this will be for check engine light. So if you want to wire this up, if you know you're good with electrical and you want to wire it up to the check engine light, you can open up the board and just tap that onto there and have the check engine light illuminate you know, through this wire. Then the last one will be the black wire. This is labeled RPM. So I am currently working on something. I have a product that's in the works that I'll be testing here soon to get the factory R56 tach to work and be in sync with the Honda computer. However, for the time being, until I figure that out, your original tachometer will not work. So if you have an aftermarket tach that you would like to use, you will use this black wire here to provide your tach output. This is directly from the ECU, so whatever RPM the ECU seeds, that's what's being transmitted through that wire for like an aftermarket tach gauge. As a heads up, if you do remove this on the R56, if you do not have the factory tach plugged in, a lot of the functions will not work. You will not have left and right turn signals. You will not have, I know that it's integrated with the key, so when you power on the ignition, none of your accessories will turn on. So if you do remove this, whether you're going to put an aftermarket tach or whether you're going fuel tach or you're putting an aftermarket dash and get rid of this, you have to open this up and just take out the board that the harness plugs into. And a lot of guys will tuck it up under the dash just to hide it out of the way, but it does need to be plugged in order for a lot of the functions to work properly. So that kind of pretty much covers the conversion harness. I will go into detail now and show you exactly where to tap the wires into. All right, so I've got the conversion harness all wired up. I've got the K-Pro ECU tuck up in there. I've screwed in the diagnostic port into the screw on the ECU cover, and I've got the USB port facing down. That way I can easily plug it into the laptop for tuning purposes. Now the two wires you're going to want to deal with down here is going to be the blue wire off my conversion harness and the green wire. These are the only two wires you're going to have to worry about down in here. Now the blue wire is going to be for the fuel pump trigger activation, and the green wire is simply going to be provided with 12 volts ignition. Now the blue wire, you're going to come down here onto this white connector, and you're going to find the white and blue wire. It's the fourth pin up from the bottom. You're going to cut it, tuck it off to the side, and you're going to tap my blue wire into the white and blue one that goes into the engine harness, or the chassis harness, I should say. Make sure you have a good connection in here. I recommend soldering all your connections just so you don't have any issues. Especially the last thing you want to do is have a connection issue with your fuel pump while you're driving. So that's going to be ran all the way back to your fuel pump and it's going to trigger it. And then the last wire is going to be the second pin down on this blue connector. It's going to be a thick red with black wire. This is going to have 12 volts when you turn your key on, and it's going to remain with 12 volts when you're cranking it over. This green wire goes to the relay, and it's going to be to power up all your relays when the ignition is on. Once you do that, the conversion harness is wired down here, and that's about it. Now the wires you need to run out here are going to be the thick black wire, the pink wire, and the red wire. So the red wire is going to come directly. I just splice a terminal, and it's going to be providing your constant 12 volts to the relays. The thick black wire is going to come around. You're going to splice a male spade connector, and it's going to hook up right into that single pin connector. That comes out of the battery cable from the battery. That white wire there, that's going to be your starter activation trigger wire. So again, the black wire for the starter is going to hook up into that connector. And then the last one will be the pink wire. The pink wire, you'll have to extend it. I ran mine all across down here by the fuse box. This is going to be your fan activation trigger. So whatever temperature you set your computer to, trigger on the radiator fan, it's going to send a ground signal to this wire, and you're going to splice it into the bottom of your R56 fuse box, and it's going to be a brown with a gray stripe wire. All right, let me see if I can get the pin. All right, you're going to cut the wire in half, and you're going to tap right into it. The other side, just tuck it out of the way, secure it, but you only need to tap it onto the side that goes into the fuse box. What that's going to do is when the computer reaches a certain temperature of coolant temp, it's going to send that ground trigger, and it's going to activate the relay, which is going to activate your factory radiator fan on the Mini. So that's pretty much covering the conversion harness wiring. It's pretty simple and straightforward if you just follow this video. All right, so the fan activation is all wired in. The fuse box is all bolted back where it belongs. Now we're gonna be moving on to the reverse lights. So in order to get your reverse lights operational, on my engine harness, you'll see a connector labeled rev. What you'll wanna do is, you'll wanna cut this here. All right, I'm just gonna cut mine now. I cut it up close to the heat shrink. That way it's a cleaner look and you don't just have wires coming out. So you'll cut that, save the pigtail off, and then on the chassis itself, you'll find this connector with 2 pins. All right, and the colors are going to be a brown and a blue and yellow striped wire. There, focus. This is going to be your reverse light switch. So now what you'll want to do is you're just going to want to tap these 2 wires, cut this connector off, and just splice these in. The polarity doesn't matter, meaning it doesn't matter what color wire you hook to which one. All this is going to do is just loop it and complete the circuit, and it'll activate your reverse lights. Once you splice that in, the Honda connector is just going to come over here on the transmission, plug in like so, and that's it. Once you put your transmission in reverse, it'll pull the D10 up on the switch, it'll complete the 2 circuit, and it'll activate the relay for your reverse lights. All right, now just to show you guys, the reverse lights are off. I'm gonna go ahead and manually shift it into reverse. That's how I did my wiring. Now, when you put in reverse, we'll go back and check. And there's your reverse lights. All right, very simple. All right, the last portion of this is gonna come down onto the engine harness. this is the last piece of the wiring that needs to be done. What I'm going to be doing is basically cutting out all the shielding and the looming in the harness. I'm going to be removing this cover. Basically, we want to expose all the wires running out of the ECU connectors, because there will be a few wires that we're going to have to retain, and it's basically to get your electric power steering functional, as well as disengaging the starter when you push your push to start button. So I'm going to go ahead and break this all down. I'm going to show you the wires that you have to keep. All the other wires that we don't keep, I'll show you how to depin them and remove them from the connectors, just for a cleaner look, so you don't have a bunch of wires just coming out of it. All right, I went ahead and I removed the looming from the engine harness, starting with the ECU connectors. A lot of it I still left because it's not something that we need. So I'm gonna give you a little quick explanation on what we're gonna be doing and why. So the way that this works from the factory, the Mini Cooper gets its cam signal from your cam sensor, and it provides that cam signal to the computer. And what that cam signal does is it allows the computer to know that the engine is cranking, and it also will take that reading and it'll wake up your electric power steering. That's what will get the power steering to function. The computer has to see that the engine is basically running in order for it to activate the power steering module. So basically what we're going to be doing is fooling the factory computer, which is why I tell you have to keep your original Mini Cooper computer. You want to fool it into thinking that the N14 or N18 is still in there, and it's going to be providing that cam signal. So what we're going to be doing is piggybacking the K-series cam signal into the mini computer, so it thinks that it's got the original motor cranking over, and in return it'll wake up the power steering, and also it will provide it its cam signal so it knows when to release the starter solenoid. So if it doesn't get that cam signal, the starter will never disengage, because the computer will never see that there's an engine that fired up and ran. So it's going to keep allowing the starter to turn over, although your K-series motor will already be running. So what we're about to do will serve two functions and two purposes. Now, currently, as of right now, for the last few years that I've been doing the R56 swaps, what I've been doing is I've taken the cam sensor wire, which will be this yellow one, and I go ahead and I tap this wire into the K-series cam sensor output wire. So it's just a piggyback into feeding it a signal in order for it to do what I basically explained. Now the problem is it is not an accurate reading for an RPM, which is why your original Mini Cooper RPM tach will not work. I am currently working on something. I designed a new product that I'm going to be testing here shortly. If it works, then we can skip running this wire into the K-series cam sensor, and ultimately, without giving too much information, I basically am coming out with a part that's going to give the mini ECU the correct signal that it needs from the crank in order to still wake up the power steering, disengage the starter, but simultaneously providing you the correct sync output that it needs to see in order to get your original tach working and working accurately. So if I do end up figuring that out and everything works, it'll be basically the same thing that I'm doing, but you'll be wiring it into a different sensor I'm going to provide with the kit. I will make a separate video on that if I get it to work. However, for this demonstration right now, I'm going to show you how to make it so that the power steering and the starter disengagement works without any additional parts. If you don't care about your RPM tack, then you can do this and it'll save you money on buying additional parts that I will be releasing. So to continue, we're gonna have to go and remove all this so we can expose the wiring, and basically we're gonna depin the rest of the wires that we aren't going to be using, just so it's not a big pile of wires sitting in your engine bay, just for a cleaner look. So what I like to do is I will take my index finger and I will apply a little pressure back here, and then I will take a pick, and there's gonna be these two locking tabs to release this cover. So I put a little bit of pressure here and I release the one tab, and then I'll release the other. And when I do that, this clip releases and exposes all of the wires. Now, the next thing, we'll flip the connector over. There will be this green tab. We're going to pick it here at the top and pull it out. And this will be your release. And that will allow you to depin the wires. So looking at it from the green tab down, this wire here will be for your cam signal, and then you'll want to keep the one next to it, which is going to be the crank. So keep this for future, in case you decide to go the other route, if it does end up working with what I'm trying to do. So you'll want to retain these two wires here. The rest of them, you can just go ahead and just start depinning them, as we really only need the connector for these two wires here. So again, just make sure that this locking green tab is pulled as far out as it can go. And then some of them might be a lot harder to remove than others, but I'll just go ahead and grab one of the wires and just pull it out. All right, and you'll do one by one until you got them all removed like so. All right, so one by one, just pull them and they'll come out. And again, you'll want to do them all, and you'll just want to keep the two yellow wires. All right, so once it's all done, you'll just go ahead and slide the lock back in so it locks in place. You'll slide your cover and lock that in, and this portion will be done. So the next thing then is you'll want to go ahead and just follow the two wires, and you'll remove them and cut them. So this one is the one for my cam signal. So I followed it, and I snipped it off. So for the cam, you only need the signal wire. For the crank, follow it. You're gonna find the connector. On this one for the crank, just a heads up for the future, I would keep all three wires. So you obviously have your crank sensor signal, and then you'll have your power and ground wires from the ECU. So for the crank and the crank only, keep this to the side, because for the part I'm going to be providing will have its own crank sensor. So you'll want to provide its signal wire, power and ground. So you might as well make use of the wires that are already here, instead of having to tap into any other wires, or run any other power and ground wires separately from somewhere else. So for the crank, keep all three wires. For the cam sensor, if you're going to go that route, just go ahead and just keep the single wire on its own. All right, so I went ahead and clipped on the factory ECU connector on there. Before we move on, I want to mention something on record, because I've had people make this mistake in the past. On the K-Series, you'll have two cam sensors. You'll have an intake cam sensor and an exhaust cam sensor. These connectors on the harness can be crossed. All right, you'll have starting issues and running issues. So to go on record, and I can only speak from my harness only, because some people might label it differently, but on my harness, you will have TDC, top dead center, and this will plug into the cam sensor, and then CPS will be your exhaust cam sensor. Now, with that being said, the exhaust cam sensor is the one that we're going to be using to tap the cam sensor signal output for the mini computer. All right, now on my harness, you'll see on pin number 1, the very first pin, it'll be a yellow wire. So you can't mess this up. Yellow wire on the mini is going to go on the yellow wire on my K-Series harness. All right, do not cut the wire completely off and splice this in somehow. All you're gonna do is splice this wire into that yellow wire. So what I do is you can take a razor blade and carefully cut this heat tube off to expose more of that wire, and then I take the same razor blade and I go ahead and cut the insulation off of the wire all around, and I will go ahead and twist tie the end of the wire onto it, and then I highly suggest soldering your connection so you have a good connection all times. If you try to tie it and then put some electrical tape, you might have run into some connection issues with vibrations and stuff. So I highly suggest soldering it. I'm personally not going to do this route right now because I'm going to be testing the other option that I'm going to try to go with. So I won't be demonstrating and cutting into the harness right now. But if you're going to go with that free option of just tapping your cam sensor into the K-Series, that's what you're going to want to do. And then just grab it, plug it in, and you are finished with the wiring. That is all that is required into getting the engine running, the fuel pump working, and the signal to talk to the CAN bus. That way your power steering and push to start buttons operate. All right, so we're gonna be moving on with the rest of this project. All right, now on to the throttle pedal. I'm gonna go ahead and take the bracket from the R53, and what you'll wanna do is you're going to wanna remove this portion of the lower bracket. That way it can sit flat up against here. And then what we're gonna do after that is you'll wanna line this up in place where it's gonna seat, and you're going to wanna drill a hole roughly around here. You'll have to take a measurement, but what you'll wanna do is basically get it in place so you can go ahead and screw it and bolt it into the existing hole right on the chassis. All right, so let me go ahead and cut this piece off. I'm gonna mark it, line it up, and then I'll show you what it's supposed to look like when we're done. All right, so I shaved off the bottom portion of the bracket. I marked, measured, and drilled a hole for the bolt to thread in through. So once I got that done, the next thing I did was I lined this up in place, threaded the bolt there. You will need to use a longer bolt, as the original Allen key it will be too short to go through the pedal and the bracket. But I aligned this up, I put this in place. There's gonna be a bracket behind here from the factory. I grabbed the self-tapper bolt with a washer and I ran it through. So this is secure right now. So now go ahead and remove this bolt. I'll put the R53 throttle pedal in, lock it in place, and then I'll fix it with the bolt going across, and that'll give it its complete secure position. Now the final piece is to make an opening like I did already right there, and that opening is going to be to feed your throttle cable through the firewall into the engine compartment. Just to kind of, this doesn't have to be precise or exact, you just have to get it close enough. Going off of the edge of the panel here onto the hole, I have roughly about 1.75 inches to 2 inches. And if we're going off the bottom of where the mount is, I've got roughly from the center of the hole down about 7.5 inches. So again, just use this as a guideline.
It doesn't have to be precise or perfect. You just need it to have a pilot hole to again feed the cable. And I got a stepper drill bit, and I went, I believe, like 7/8 of an inch. It just has to be big enough to be able to feed the cable through and the nuts to clear. So I'll go ahead and do that. So again, just need enough to feed the cable through. Once you feed it all the way through, again, you can slide the pedal on, put your final bolt, and then just connect it onto your throttle body, and the cable will be done. So I'll go ahead and install mine, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's completed. So here's the final install of the pedal. You can see the hole that I made for the cable to run out from. In case you're wondering, this is the stepper bit that I was referring to. These things come in handy. So now I'll go in the engine bay, show you how that came out. So the cable will come out just below the firewall right there. You'll have it routing around, and in through the throttle body it goes. All right, so I'll show you a demonstration of it opening and closing from the inside, and that's pretty much it for the throttle. Now the last step is going to be installing the axles. Unlike the 02 to 06 first gen minis, we can get away with using base model RSX and EP3 off the shelf axles, and they pop right in. On the R56 chassis, the passenger side is too short and doesn't reach the intermediate shaft, and on the driver's side it's a little too long and it binds on the joints. So I have in the past bought a bunch of aftermarket axles and tried to swap, axle bars, cups, etc. Just can't seem to get the right fitment on there. So for my swap kit, if you're using my swap kit, the Drive Shaft Shop makes the axle specifically for my swap, which are these two. They are direct fit if using my kit, and this is the part number. All right, 710355. So if you email axles@driveshaftshop.com, tell them you purchased an RPT Creations K-swap kit for the R56 chassis, and provide this item number in your email, and they'll be able to send you a quote to get your axles on order. Now I do want to emphasize this. If you are making your own kit, or if someone else in the future makes a kit, for the R56 chassis, this part number, this is only guaranteed to fit my mount kit. Anyone else, again, if you try to design your own, they are not going to support you if the axles do not fit. There is no warranty, no nothing. They can only ensure fitment if you are using my kit, as I'm the one that sent them measurements, specs, and everything to use. So again, if you take it upon yourself to use that part number and you built your own kit and you install them and they don't fit, or you have issues, they're not going to be able to back you up on anything. You'll have to basically use their diagrams and spreadsheets to how to get the specific measurements for your mount kit that you designed. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and install the axles. I'm gonna finish buttoning it up. We'll be able to lower the car on the ground, and I'll fill it up with transmission fluid, and it'll finally be drivable. All right, I've got my battery charger hooked up. I'm gonna attempt to give it its first start. Let's see what we got. All right, and there you have it, fired right up. So now basically I'm just gonna go ahead and bolt up the front end. I use the factory radiator hoses and just cut them to length to hook up to your lower thermostat housing and the upper, and that's pretty much it. Enjoy your swap.